Hey, folks. All right. Let's jump right into it. There's a lot to cover here, and I know this is a hot topic, so let's dive right in. Hey, everybody. So my name's Andy. I'm a senior community manager at GoDaddy, responsible for our customer community platforms. So that's the GoDaddy blog, GoDaddy events, and GoDaddy community forums. Before I get into all the tactical stuff, I wanted to give you a little bit of a lay of the land of where I'm coming from. Geographically, I'm coming from outside of Toronto, so howdy to any other fellow Canadians. So, like most of you, maybe not most of you, like many of you, all of this started as a hobby for me back in the early 2000s. I was a teen working on gaming forums and fan sites. And then in 2009, 2010-ish, started doing meetups and in-person events. And then in 2015, I joined GoDaddy to be their first community manager for the GoDaddy Pro Partner Program. Now, up until joining GoDaddy, all of that work was a hobby. I wasn't getting paid for any of it. I just really liked the work. So what was I doing outside of that? How was I paying the bills? Well, I went to school for advertising, which wasn't a fantastic choice at the time in hindsight. Graduated into the recession in 2009. But thankfully, because of the work I had done on forums and fan sites, I had some self-taught web skills. So I fell backwards into the tech industry, working with IT companies, web agencies, and startups. And that work gave me a real appreciation for the diligence that goes into launching online projects. So from gathering requirements to defining a scope of work, all of that fun stuff really frames my thinking around how do we approach community platforms. So my biggest piece of advice before we get into all of the line items is this. Create a working doc, please. From all of the different projects that I've launched over the years, having everything in one place is so incredibly helpful. This one central source of truth that you can share with other folks in your organization, consolidate all of the information in one spot, and from that working doc, you can start crafting the proposal that you're going to bring to your stakeholders and decision makers. There are a few basic concepts I want to knock out. First off, when we talk about community, what does community mean? Everyone has their own take, their own opinion on what community is. Talk to anybody in community club, you're probably going to hear dozens of different definitions. There are many like this one, but this one is mine. Is that a community is a connected group of people with something in common. And that the community platform is the place where the group comes together. And this next point is something I'm very passionate about, is that your community platform is a shared asset for the entire organization. All too often, I've found that community platforms and community as a whole gets lumped in under support. What ends up happening is that we look at community with a bit of a siloed, blindered view, that if it falls outside of the realm of support, that it doesn't fit the community. And what ends up happening is that we have different parts of the organization going and trying to do the same thing, creating all of these different destinations, and it's a real waste. In my opinion, in a community-led organization, the community platform is a shared resource. Instead of spending money and time and resources on building these duplicate platforms, what we should be doing instead is extending the capability of our central community platform. If our objective is to get in front of our community members, whether they be customers or employees, stakeholders, donors, that should be the single place. So, choosing the platform, the reason we're here and the reason we're talking. At the end of the day, I like to compare it to shopping. There's three things that you're trying to do no matter what you're shopping for. What do you need? What are your options? And what's your preference or what's your recommendation? Whether you're feeling hungry or you ran out of toilet paper, it's the same consideration at a high level. So first off, what do you need? For a community platform, there are a few questions we need to ask, and these are the things we want to start documenting in our working doc. First off, who are your stakeholders? Who are the folks that need to be involved in this consideration? If we look out beyond the scope of just support and we think about all the different parts of the organization where community could come in handy, where the community platform could help, we open up more doors and we open up more opportunities for growth and expansion. We could look at sales and marketing. How can we help them? We look at product. How do we help onboarding and activation? Support, of course, if anything goes wrong, but also closing the loop back to marketing. How do we turn our users into fans, into advocates? There are so many different parts within a customer community of the customer lifecycle that community could be supporting, and the community platform is a tactical way to bring those things to life. So as you're talking to these different stakeholder groups, what are their goals and challenges? You're not going to them and saying, hey, these are the things that we're trying to do. How can you help us? You want to be the one offering that help out of the gate. Going to these different teams and asking them, what are the goals and the challenges for you and your organization? And then based on that, based on what you hear, thinking, well, how can we help? What could we be doing within the platform, within the community to help you fulfill your goals? Because that's where you're starting to build credibility, and that's where you can start tapping into that leverage to start asking for some help on your end. Question number 2, what are your options? There's no single platform that does everything. This is one thing I've really noticed when we talk about all these different communities that are popping up. Different communities have different needs depending on the type of community, who's in the community members, what sort of programs you're running. If you ask, what does a community manager do? You're going to hear a lot of different definitions. Do you do social media? Do you do blogging content? Do you do newsletters? Do you do events? All of these different things could potentially fall within the scope of the community manager's responsibility, and they could be part of that community platform. So rather than saying there's one tool that we feel like this could be one thing that does it all, I find what we end up doing is we're creating a collection of tools. We're creating this custom stack that's bespoke to the needs that we have as an organization. And so as we're looking at platform evaluation, what we're really looking at is what are the different tools that we could be using and how do we bring them all together? I'm looking in the chat and I see comments about, oh, this feels like a direct attack. Oh no. For anyone who's in the chat or anyone who's tuning in from a community platform vendor, I love you all. And I think that the pie is big enough for everyone to have a place. It's not that one platform is better than another. It's that some platforms are better suited to certain needs than others. And for your community, it's a question of, what are your needs? What are the things that you need to accomplish? How are we going to bring those things together to create your own solution? Brings us to point number 3. What's your recommendation? What's your preferred solution? After you've gathered all the requirements from your stakeholders, you've looked at the options that are available, what's the solution that you recommend? Now, as you start thinking about how are we going to bring this to our decision makers, not just the stakeholders, but the folks who are going to sign the checks. What's the business case? How are we going to articulate that? What are the things that we're doing for the organization to solve those problems? And this is where I'd like to remind you that you're the expert. If you're in the organization, you're in the company as the community professional, your leaders are looking to you for advice and strategy on how can we best support our community. You're not looking to get a favor or asking for permission necessarily. What you're doing is you're making a recommendation based on your professional experience and advice. This is the approach that you think we should take. So let's go into these in a little bit more detail. All right, what do you need? Internal needs. Flag the potential helpers and hurdles within your organization. Look for the teams where you are nicely aligned, where community already makes sense for them. They're already thinking about community. Then also look for the potential blockers. When we deal with data, in particular in community, especially if you have European users, there are legal considerations, things around GDPR. How are we handling consent? How are we handling the information that we're gathering? Having a strong relationship with legal out of the gate and security, having these conversations before you go and start building the platforms, that's going to help you. You want to be friends with these folks. And then throughout the rest of the organization, you want to start building those relationships. And that's one of the things when you're gathering requirements at the beginning. Is also an opportunity for you to introduce yourself, to get other folks in the org thinking about community, realizing that this exists, and thinking about how could this be useful or helpful for the things that we're trying to do, or how can we work together with the community team to make something happen. Something I found is that the larger the organization is, the more likely you're going to need help from many different parts of the business. I definitely feel this at GoDaddy. We're not a small company, and there are a lot of different considerations that we need to take into account regarding security, regarding legal, regarding different customers and different community members in different regions. We have to factor all of this in. So even if something seems like a relatively simple implementation tactically, you're just turning something on, hitting a checkbox, there are potentially tons of conversations that need to go into that decision well in advance. So when you're figuring out what your internal needs are, consider those, get them documented, keep it all in that working doc, and then we move on to the member needs. This is going to depend on the type of community that you're building. I typically think about customer communities because that's where I live. But I'm thinking about, well, what are our customer needs? What are the things that they're trying to accomplish that the community could help with? And that's across, again, the whole customer lifecycle. I'm also thinking about our strategic partner needs. Are there business development partners that we could be working with? Are there other types of partnerships that the company has? It could be brand partnerships. Are there things that we could be doing with our partners where the community platform, the community could play a role? And then are there any unmet market needs? Are there things that potential customers could benefit from if we had a place for it within our community? If we don't just think about our customer community as a place for existing customers, but is it a place for people like our existing customers, potential customers? Well, what are the things that they're looking for? Could we fulfill a need through our community platform for those folks, regardless of whether or not they're actually buying something from us? And then next, I like to look at other existing communities. What's already out there? Where are your potential members already getting together? Take a note from those, what's working, what's not. Look at what your competitors are doing. Do they have customer communities or brand communities? What's working for them based on what you can see? What's working for them? Are there gaps or issues that you see that they're having that you'd like to mitigate with your approach? And then what are your indirect competitors doing? Just because there's a community that is not tied to a direct competitor to you doesn't mean that you can't take inspiration from that. So look at where your potential members are gathering, regardless of whether or not it's a direct fit or a direct competition to your business. All right, take a water break there. I'm gonna just take a skim through the chat. Yes, Jamie, if your leaders are not looking for your input on the decision, that's a huge red flag. Absolutely agree. Too much common sense in this presentation. I try. What are your options? All right, first impressions. Quick comment on this. So there is such a massive variety of community platforms right now. It's overwhelming. It feels like every day there's a new platform coming online, serving some need. So it's really hard to say, do this for every platform that you're evaluating, because depending on what you're looking at, there are other more specific considerations. Like you're going to be looking at different criteria for a virtual events platform than what you're looking for a asynchronous discussion forum or support community. But at a high level, these are the things that I look for, regardless of what platform I'm deciding on. First off, first impressions, the sniff test, features. Does it do what you need it to do? Just skimming over the feature set. Is this even in the ballpark of the problems that we're trying to solve? Reviews. Does it work for others? Do a little bit of diligence. Look at reviews that are online. Jump into the community club Slack. Ask on the community club forums. Talk to other people. Hey, has anyone used this before? There's a tools and software or tools and tech channel in the community club Slack. I love hanging out in there. It's a great place to ask for advice and guidance from other folks. And I know we have some platform vendors hanging out in there as well that could answer questions. So go and ask. It doesn't hurt. And third, demos. Can you try before you buy? It could be as simple as, does this community platform have a customer community of their own and they're using their own platform for the community? What's that like? Or if you can find other users or clients, customers of those platforms, and take those communities, take those platforms for a spin before you decide on whether or not you want to go any further into evaluation. Next, setup. What does it take to get a platform up and running? Jamie, breathe, Andy. Yes, this is what happens when I do presentations. I have so much information and then I realize I'm actually tight on time. And so I get anxious and excited. Don't worry, I have this all written up in a post. I'm also going to share it in Community Club afterwards. Deep breaths. Setup. What does it take? Who does the setup? Is it a do-it-yourself approach, or is it a do-it-for-me approach? If you look at enterprise community platforms, let's say you're looking at something like Khoros or Salesforce, Community Cloud or Experience Cloud. When you're up in the enterprise level, a lot of this is going to be do it for me. There's going to be a sales process, an onboarding process. Everything is very regimented, lots of people involved, because that's how things work in enterprise. If you're a smaller organization, let's say you're a small nonprofit, maybe you're a startup, looking at more self-serve DIY solutions can get you up and running a bit more quickly. It really comes down again, like what's the fit here? Does it do what you need it to do? Who's going to be doing the setup? Second, how complex is the setup process? What's involved in just turning the thing on? Is it something where it has to be done by an implementation team, or can you take on some of the work yourself internally within your organization with your team? Looking at all of the details, installation, configuration, customization, trying to get as much of this information as possible in advance. My tip, look for documentation, look for docs. If they have an open documentation or open support portal, going into the docs and looking to see, like, do they have installation defined here? Is there an installation guide? What do we need to do to get this thing up and running? Love this point here from Jocelyn in the chat. Talk to people who have actually launched with the platform. Yes, don't just talk to sales, talk to people who have actually used it. Usage, number 2, how intuitive is the product to actually use? How intuitive is the platform? How intuitive is it for your members? So go through it with the mindset of a user. And depending on how technically savvy your users are, some platforms are better for more tech-savvy audiences than others. How intuitive is it for your community managers? Looking at things like moderation, especially, what's that flow like? Is it intuitive? Is it functional? And then what is it like for your administrators and developers? So once we start getting into the configuration and customization and integration, really, at an enterprise level, how intuitive is that process? How well documented is that? Which brings us to support. So what happens if you run into issues? What happens if you need help? Is there self-serve documentation? Do they have a nicely laid out docs portal that you just go into and find the answers that you need when you need it? Is there a peer support or user community that you can tap into? And is there a professional services team or an ecosystem of partners who can help you with heavier lifts? So let's say you want to do some customization or some additional custom development work on top of the platform. Is that something that the vendor can offer to you, or is that something that they could refer a partner to you? These are all important things to keep in mind, not just for launch, but where are we going to be a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And everyone's favorite question, how much is it going to cost? Lots of different considerations here. Look at licensing for baseline usage, for additional features, especially when you start getting into, again, more of the enterprise level of platforms, really probing to figure out to build the solution that we need, what's that cost going to be in terms of licensing? And then on the support side, is it a fixed rate where you pay a certain amount per month or per year for support versus something that might be more variable, where you're paying for, let's say, a block of hours or something similar? And then services. Is there a project approach versus a retainer approach? What does that look like? Then how does that differ from support? In some cases, it might be separate pricing models, separate teams that handle the work. They might have a project team or a services team on one side and then a support team on the other side. And then finally, that third question, what's your recommendation? What's your preference? When you're making your case to decision makers, start off with what problems are you solving? What problems are you solving? What are the needs that you've identified through the requirements gathering and that discovery process? What are the big rocks that you've uncovered? And then how is your proposal going to address that? How is the community platform that you're choosing or that solution stack going to address those challenges? Who's going to do the work? Are you going to be doing it internally? Is it going to be done externally? Do you need to bring on additional headcount? Are there agencies you need to bring in to do the work? Are there other dependencies internally? You don't need to go super detailed when you're just in that initial phase of making the case, but you need to at least have some line of sight into who are the people that we need to be tapping if we do this. And then what will it cost, both in terms of dollar amount, but also in terms of resources. When we think about cost, what we're talking about is the overall impact. Are you going to need to take developers off of existing projects? Is there stuff that needs to be deferred that's already on the timeline? Maybe some commitments that need to be moved out? Consider all of those as well. So when I do proposals, what I like to do is look at 3 major factors as part of that. First off is speed. How quickly can we get the solution up and running? Second is what will it involve? So generally, what's the approach going to be? And then third, how much is it going to cost? Same as the previous slide. And then what I do is I bracket it. I'll do a pricing table, basically. The same way if you were to go to sign up for some SaaS product, it's low, medium, high. There's going to be different price points for each. You're going to have pros and cons listed for each. And you're going to have one of them as the one that you're recommending. Typically, how I do it is I say the low end is going to be low risk, lower cost. It might be a bit faster to implement, but it's going to be very stripped down. It's going to be very MVP, bare bones. There are a lot of things that we want to do, but we might not do it immediately out of the gate. We're going to do this as a trial and then iterate and start adding to it over time. A media might be, we're going to take a few months to implement this, do a bit more diligence around standing it up and getting the resources that we need. And then on the high end, this is a big initiative. We're throwing a lot of resources against it. This is a big swing. This is a really rudimentary example of a pricing table. It gives you an idea visually of what we're talking about here. Looking at all the different components of your stack, what's the timing going to be for implementation? What's that total cost going to be? I try to break this all down in a visual way and then elaborate on it in like an appendice or something. Example stacks. Everyone loves just getting recommendations of tools. So I know I'm almost at time, so I'm going to skim through this pretty quickly. Hobby, creator, fandom. Maybe you have a blog on WordPress. You're running your newsletter with ConvertKit. Social media, managing it with Buffer. Maybe you're on Envision Community. Envision PowerBoard was one of the first community platforms I ever used. I'm a bit of a fanboy for it. I think they need more love. I'm a big fan, especially with their moderation capabilities. Chat, maybe you have a Discord server that you set up, and then you're running all your analytics off of Google Analytics. For a startup, get a little bit more technical. You have more development resources in-house. Blog and newsletter, maybe you run that with Ghost. Social media, you're using Sprout Social. Forum, you have a more technical audience. You're using Discourse because now you can use Markdown and some other more power user-ish features. Chat, you're on Slack because all your members are on Slack. And analytics, you're really concerned about privacy, so you use Fathom. And then on the enterprise side, blog, headless CMS. You use Contentful because you have a development team that's going to integrate that with your front of site. Newsletter, Salesforce, because everything is in Salesforce. Social media, Sprinkler, because Sprinkler is just so common for enterprise social media management. Forum, maybe you're using Insighted and tapping into some of those integrations. And analytics, again, because, hey, enterprise, Adobe Analytics. There's a lot of things that you could put into your community stack, and that's what I just want to throw a little mention in here. I have a little side project I'm working on at communitystacks.com. You'll find the write-up of this deck on here. It's communitystacks.com/guide. I'm going to have a follow-up discussion and recap on Community Club. Check out the forums there. If you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter. I'm AndyMCI. Hit me up through my personal site, andymci.ca, and I am always lurking in Slack, especially in that tools channel. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to hit the Q&A. I'm at time. I'm going to grab the questions out of the Q&A. I'll bring those into Community Club. Join me over there, and happy to jump into like calls and talk about all this stuff. Thanks so much for having me. You guys are awesome. And now, I think it's who's up next? Erica and Brian. I'm looking forward to this one. Thanks all.